A waitress was forced to wear an electric device around her neck. Small, but powerful enough to control her entire life. If she paused for even a few seconds, fear struck before the pain did, forcing her to keep moving like a shadow never allowed to rest. They didn't scream or beat anyone. They punished slowly, methodically, until she truly believed she deserved it. Then one day, a Navy SEAL and his German Shepherd walked in, and the dog was the first to sense that something was wrong. The soldier's eyes missed nothing, but it was the dog's instinct that shattered the silence hanging in the air. What they were about to uncover wasn't just a device.
Zoom in on Sector 4.
It was an entire system of control disguised as discipline. Where are you watching from? But like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 followers, because every follow fuels more powerful stories like this. Now, let's begin. The lake looked like it had been polished for someone important. Morning light slid across the water in thin sheets, turning every ripple into a bright, restless coin. Beyond the shore, spruce and birch stood shoulder to shoulder, dark needles and pale bark holding back the last stubborn breath of winter. In Larkhaven, spring didn't arrive the way it did in brochures. It arrived like a tired soldier, quiet, cautious, still wearing cold in its bones. Rowan Hale drove with both hands on the wheel, as if the road were a checklist he didn't trust anyone else to complete. He was 35, about 6 feet tall, 1.83 meters, in the kind of measurement he'd learned overseas, and built the way functional strength looks when it's been honed for years. Compact, disciplined. Not made for display, his face was clean-shaven to the skin, his jaw squared and sharp, cheekbones defined like the edge of a blade. His hair, dark brown, was clipped in a military cut that had grown just a shade longer than regulation, enough to suggest time off without ever suggesting softness. His skin was fair, but weathered by northern wind sunlight didn't warm him so much as reveal where cold had lived. His eyes, gray-blue, had a way of watching without judging. The gaze of a man who had seen enough chaos to stop romanticizing it, but not enough to stop caring when it appeared in the wrong place. He wasn't here for a vacation. He was here because he had been told to stop. The official language was operational pause. The truth was simpler and harder. His shoulder needed time, his nerves needed distance, and his mind needed a horizon that didn't look like a threat assessment. Was someone in his chain had decided that a low-risk advisory evaluation of a private property would count as rest. Rowan didn't argue. He rarely did. Arguing implied you believed the world could be convinced to behave. In the passenger seat, Sable sat upright, calm as a statue with a heartbeat. The German Shepherd was 5 years old, coat layered in cream, gray, and black like the winter forest had painted him. He wasn't oversized. He was athletic, built for endurance more than intimidation. His ears stayed alert, turning on invisible hinges to track sound. His amber eyes were intelligent in a way that wasn't cute, more like competent. The black harness around his chest and shoulders had a dark red trim that caught the light in quick flashes, and a sturdy handle lay flat against his back. The kind of practical detail you saw on dogs trained to work, not pose. Sable's mouth was closed. His breathing was steady. But Rowan knew the dog's quiet didn't mean peace. It meant attention. They passed a small cluster of storefronts, coffee, hardware, and a diner with a hand-painted sign that promised pie like it was a moral position. A few people were out early. A jogger with a knit cap pulled low. An older man walking a small terrier that had the confidence of something that had never met consequences. Rowan's cabin sat a mile outside town, tucked near the tree line. It smelled faintly of pine and old wood, honest smells, uncomplicated. He unloaded his duffel, then the smaller bag with Sable's gear. He moved without hurry, but without pause either, the way his body understood momentum as a form of safety. His phone buzzed once with an incoming call. He stared at the screen for a second longer than necessary before answering. "Rowan," said a voice he knew well enough to hear the history in it. "You made it." Gage Mercer, early 40s, former military police before he'd traded uniforms for private contracts. Gage's voice always carried a thin thread of humor, like he was narrating his own life to keep it from getting heavy. Rowan stepped onto the porch, the lake visible through the trees like a promise you weren't sure you deserved. "I'm here." "Good," Gage said. "You still doing the two hands on the wheel thing?" Rowan didn't answer. Gage chuckled softly, like that was answer enough. "You've got the address?" Gage continued. "Alderwick Lodge, private road, stone signage. Looks like money tried to pretend it was rustic." "I've got it." There was a pause longer than casual, shorter than confession. "Listen," Gage said, and the humor dimmed. "It's clean. Too clean. They run that place like a machine. I did security out there last season. Didn't love the vibe." Rowan's eyes drifted to Sable, who had stepped to the edge of the porch and was watching the tree line as if it were speaking. "What kind of vibe?" Rowan asked. "The kind where you feel like you should lower your voice even when you're outside," Gage said. "Anyway, you're just there to advise. Walk around, check risks, write your report. In and out." Rowan heard what wasn't being said. Don't make trouble. Don't get involved. "I'll see it for myself," Rowan said. Gage exhaled. "That's what I was afraid you'd say. Call me after." The line went dead. Rowan stood still for a moment, the spring air cold enough to keep you honest. Behind him, Sable let out a low breath through his nose, almost a snort, then looked at Rowan as if to ask why humans needed phones to sense danger. Rowan reached down and scratched behind Sable's ear, a small gesture that looked casual but meant something like gratitude. "All right," he murmured. "Let's go." They drove later that morning. The private road to Alderwick Lodge wound through tall oaks and dense evergreen, the kind of trees that made the world feel older than your problems. The property announced itself with a stone sign, Alderwick letters engraved clean and sharp. Beyond that, the road curved, and the lodge appeared like something staged for a magazine spread. Dark wood beams, wide windows, manicured grounds still holding patches of snow in shaded corners. It was beautiful, and it felt arranged. Rowan parked near a discreet side entrance, where staff vehicles lined up in neat rows like they'd been measured by ruler. He clipped Sable's leash to the harness, and they approached the building together. Inside, warmth hit Rowan first, then scent cedar, citrus cleaner, and something faintly floral meant to suggest comfort. The lobby ceiling was high with exposed beams. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, flames arranged behind glass like even fire had rules here. A woman behind the front desk looked up. She was in her late 20s or early 30s, slender, with dark hair pulled into a tight, professional bun. Her skin was a warm brown tone, and her expression was polite in the way service industry training teaches, friendly but guarded, like a door with a chain lock. "Welcome to Alderwick," she said. Her voice was smooth, measured. "How may I help you?" Rowan introduced himself with the calm efficiency of someone used to credentials. "Rowan Hale. I'm scheduled for a risk assessment walkthrough." Her smile sharpened by half a degree. "Yes, Mr. Hale. We were informed. She glanced at Sable, and something in her eyes changed. Interest, caution, respect. Your dog is Sable, Rowan said. He's with me. Sable stood perfectly still beside Rowan's leg. His ears were forward, eyes scanning. He wasn't pulling. He wasn't nervous. But the dog's attention held an intensity that made even calm people straighten their posture. The receptionist nodded. Of course. Please wait one moment. As she made a call, Rowan watched the lobby's rhythm. Staff moved through it like wind through tall grass, quiet, efficient, almost invisible. No one lingered. No one stopped to chat. Even the guests who passed through looked subtly encouraged to keep moving, as if stillness was an inconvenience. But Rowan felt the familiar itch between his shoulder blades, pattern recognition, his mind collecting details without permission. Sable's nose dipped slightly, not to the floor, just into the air. He inhaled once, slow and deep. Then his head turned toward a hallway to the right, an area marked staff only. His body didn't tense the way it did when he sensed direct threat. Instead, he froze, an unnatural stillness. Rowan followed the dog's gaze. The hallway was quiet. Too quiet. It was just a corridor. Beige walls, soft lighting, a door at the end with a small keypad. Nothing dramatic. And yet Sable stared like he could hear something behind the paint. Rowan tightened his grip on the leash without pulling. What is it? He murmured, not expecting an answer, but needing the sound of his own voice. Sable didn't look away. A second later, a faint sound reached Rowan's ears, so small he thought it might be his imagination. A tiny electronic tick like a button being pressed, or a device acknowledging a command. Sable's ears flicked precise. Rowan felt his stomach tighten in a way his shoulder never did. The receptionist returned her attention to him. Mr. Hale, our operations manager will meet you shortly. You may begin in the lobby and public areas. Rowan nodded. Understood. He should have started with the obvious. Exits, fire suppression, blind corners. He should have kept it simple. But Sable's stillness was a warning in a language Rowan had learned to trust because it wasn't fear. It was clarity. Rowan turned his body slightly, not toward the staff corridor, too obvious, but enough to keep it within his peripheral vision. He walked slowly across the lobby, letting his eyes skim the seams of the building. Camera placement, door hinges, the way private was enforced without being spoken aloud. That was when he saw her. She emerged from a service doorway near the corridor, pushing a linen cart. Housekeeping uniform in muted slate gray, apron tied neat. She was around 29, average height, build lean from constant movement. Her dark hair was pulled back simply, not polished like the receptionist's practical, not decorative. Her skin was light olive, her face composed in the way people look when they are trying very hard not to look like anything at all. But what struck Rowan was the movement. She moved too fast for the task. Not hurried like someone busy compulsive, like stopping would trigger something worse than being late. Her shoulders were tight. Her hands didn't fidget, but they trembled faintly at the fingertips, as if exhaustion had become permanent. Around her neck was a black employee lanyard with a plastic ID badge. Embedded at the base of it was a small device, sleek, matte, innocuous. The kind of thing you'd call a tracker if you were selling it, and a leash if you were honest. As she passed the lobby, her eyes flicked down not to a watch, not to a clock, to the device, A sound followed her, barely audible, a soft tick. Her body flinched, not dramatically. Not enough for a casual observer to notice, just a tiny involuntary jerk at the shoulder, like a muscle remembering pain. Then she sped up. Sable stepped forward, placing himself half a pace between Rowan and the woman's path. Not blocking her, not threatening, just present. A steady shape. A silent interruption. The woman looked up. For the briefest moment, her eyes met Rowan's. There was no surprise in them. Only terror, clean and immediate, as if she had been caught doing something dangerous. Then her gaze snapped away. She pushed the cart faster, as if movement itself could erase the fact that she had been seen. Rowan watched her disappear down the hallway, the soft tick of the device fading with her steps. Sable remained still, eyes fixed in the direction she'd gone, ears angled to catch the next sound. Rowan felt something cold settle beneath his ribs, a familiar feeling from faraway places, a feeling he hated because it meant responsibility. Someone had built a system inside this beautiful lodge, and someone was trapped inside it. He lowered his voice, speaking only for Sable. "Okay," he whispered, almost like a promise. "I saw it." Sable didn't look at him, but his tail gave one slow, deliberate sweep like a signal, as if to say, "Good. Now don't look away." The first hour inside Alderwick Lodge taught Rowan something simple. Nothing here was accidental. Not the lighting, not the scent, not even the silence. He began where protocol demanded public spaces. Fire exits, blind angles, camera placement. He walked with a relaxed posture, hands loosely at his sides, but his eyes recorded everything. Sable moved beside him in quiet alignment, black harness snug against his chest, dark red trim catching flashes of chandelier light. The lobby had the aesthetic of comfort, but the rhythm of enforcement. Employees moved in straight lines. They did not stop to exchange casual words. They did not lean. They did not linger. Even their smiles were brief. Rowan had seen that kind of uniformity before. Not in hotels, in units before inspection. He moved into a long hallway lined with framed photographs, winter weddings, autumn retreats, couples wrapped in curated happiness. A woman in housekeeping uniform stepped out of a side door carrying a stack of folded towels. Not Maris. This one was older, mid-50s perhaps, broad-shouldered, strong hands that told a story of kitchens and knives. She paused when she noticed Rowan. Her name tag read, Etta Rowe. Etta was built like someone who had never trusted machines to do her job properly. She had iron-gray hair tied low at the nape of her neck, deep lines bracketing her mouth. Not bitterness, but endurance. Her eyes were sharp, assessing. Not frightened, just tired. "Security?" she asked, voice low and gravel soft. "Assessment," Rowan corrected gently. Her lips twitched. "Same difference around here?" Sable sniffed the air near her apron, then settled, neutral. No alert. Etta shifted the towels in her arms. You'll want to look at the staff wing if you're serious." Rowan watched her carefully. "Why?" She shrugged. "Because the guests aren't the ones who get monitored." The word hung in the air like frost. Before Rowan could respond, a faint vibration cut through the hallway. Not loud, but Sable's head snapped toward the sound instantly. Rowan's eyes followed. From around the corner, Maris Quinn appeared again, pushing her linen cart. Today her hair was pulled tighter, as if control over strands might translate to control over something else. Her uniform sat neatly against her slim frame, but her shoulders were rigid, the tension visible even from a distance. Around her neck, the black lanyard rested against her collarbone. The small, embedded device was matte and discreet, almost elegant. It vibrated again. Maris's jaw tightened. She didn't look down this time. She didn't need to. She sped up. Etta's gaze dropped to the device, then flicked back to Rowan. "They call it motion compliance," she said quietly. Corporate language makes everything sound polite." Rowan felt a slow pressure building in his chest. Not anger yet. Recognition. "Is it optional?" he asked. Etta let out a short, humorless breath. "Only if you can afford not to eat." She turned and disappeared through a service door before he could press further. Rowan remained still for a moment. Sable's body had gone rigid, not aggressive, but intensely focused. His ears angled toward Maris as she turned down another corridor. Rowan followed at a measured pace, careful not to appear as if he were pursuing. The hallway opened into a secondary lounge for guests. A few patrons sat in leather chairs, coffee cups in hand. A young man in a blazer stood near the fireplace, speaking into a tablet device. He was in his early 40s, clean-shaven, with smooth, dark hair combed back in a style that suggested deliberation. His posture was upright, but not military corporate. His suit jacket fit precisely, not fashion-forward, but meticulously tailored. On silver cufflinks flashed when he moved. His expression was composed. This had to be Dorian Kessler. Dorian finished his sentence into the tablet, then turned with a controlled smile. His eyes were pale gray, with a faint green undertone, and calculating without appearing cold. "Mr. Hale," he said smoothly. "Welcome to Alderwick." His handshake was firm but brief, the grip of someone who valued efficiency over warmth. "I hope your accommodations are satisfactory." "They are," Rowan replied. Dorian's gaze dropped briefly to Sable. "I understand he accompanies you." "He does." "A remarkable animal." "He's good at noticing things." Dorian's smile did not change. "We pride ourselves on that here." A silence passed between them, not hostile, but evaluative. "I've reviewed your brief," Dorian continued. "You're here to assess potential vulnerabilities." "That's correct." "Excellent. What you'll find our systems are state-of-the-art." Rowan's eyes drifted to a ceiling-mounted sensor. "I've noticed." Dorian followed his gaze. "Motion analytics, environmental sensors, staffing optimization." The word lingered. "Optimization," Rowan repeated. "Yes," Dorian said calmly. "Human behavior improves with structure." There was no arrogance in his tone, only certainty. Rowan studied him carefully. Dorian did not look like a villain. He looked like a man who believed he was refining something imperfect. "Do employees have input on the monitoring?" Rowan asked. "They have contracts," Dorian replied smoothly. "Transparency is essential." As if summoned by the word, a soft vibration echoed faintly from down the corridor again. Dorian's eyes flicked in that direction, almost imperceptibly. Then he smiled again. "Accountability keeps standards high." Rowan felt something click into place. Not evidence, not yet. Just alignment. Sable shifted his weight, not toward Dorian, toward the corridor. As Rowan continued the walk-through, Sable suddenly stopped dead at the threshold of a carpeted side hallway. He did not bark. He did not growl. He simply lowered himself into a sit, slowly, deliberately, and refused to move. It was not defiance. It was refusal. Rowan had trained dogs long enough to know the difference. Sable's gaze locked on a closed door halfway down the corridor. There was nothing visible about it. No signage. No unusual sound. But Sable's nostrils flared, And then something changed. Maris stepped out of that very door. Her eyes were unfocused for half a second, like someone coming back from a bright light. Her hand rose instinctively to her throat, just beneath the device. For a moment, just one breath, she looked straight at Rowan. Not pleading, not asking, recognizing. Sable's ears softened slightly, as if the dog had just confirmed something only he understood. Then Maris blinked, composure snapping back into place. She moved again, faster than necessary. The moment passed, but Rowan felt the weight of it settle inside him. That door mattered, and Sable knew it. The rest of the afternoon unfolded with clinical normalcy. Rowan observed schedules posted discreetly in staff areas' 15-minute blocks, mapped out with surgical precision. A digital board tracked assignments. Green indicators shifted to amber when tasks lagged. No shouting. No raised voices. Only data. He watched as a young man, early 20s, sandy hair, slight build, hesitated near the break table. His name tag read Noah Briggs. There was something unfinished about him, like adulthood had arrived faster than he'd prepared for. He glanced at the clock, then at his device. He sat. 20 seconds passed. 30. At 45, the device on his lanyard emitted a soft buzz. Noah stood immediately. His expression wasn't fear. It was embarrassment. Like he'd been caught slouching in school. And Rowan approached him later under the pretense of evaluating sightlines. "How long have you worked here?" Rowan asked casually. 8 months, Noah replied. His voice was light but tight around the edges. "Pays better than campus jobs. Does the monitoring bother you?" Noah shrugged. "It keeps things organized." "That's not what I asked." Noah hesitated. Then he smiled in the practiced way Rowan had already seen too often. "Everyone has to pull their weight." Sable watched Noah carefully, not alert, just attentive. Rowan noted the micro-expressions, the flicker of anxiety when the lanyard vibrated faintly in warning. This was not chaos. This was conditioning. Late afternoon light slanted through tall windows, turning dust into visible currents. Rowan stood near the lobby's outer glass wall, watching the ground stretch toward the tree line. Beautiful. Controlled. He felt the tension in his shoulder, a dull reminder that even disciplined bodies carried strain. Behind him, while he heard the faintest electronic hum again, Sable's ears twitched. Rowan didn't turn immediately. Instead, he let the sound exist. He let the pattern settle. Motion. Pause. Correction. Efficiency. Someone here believed human stillness was a flaw to be engineered away, and someone was paying the price for that belief. Rowan lowered his gaze to Sable. The dog met his eyes steadily. No growl, no warning bark, just patience. Rowan exhaled slowly. "Not yet," he murmured under his breath. He was here to assess risk. He had not yet decided what kind. Rowan woke before the alarm, the way his body always did, as if sleep were a negotiation he never fully trusted. The cabin was dim and cold, morning pressed against the window like a quiet hand. Somewhere beyond the glass, the lake lay hidden under fog, and the pines stood still. Dark silhouettes in a world that hadn't decided whether to thaw. He stayed in bed for a few seconds, listening. Not for footsteps. Not for the creak of a door, just for the absence of anything that needed him. The silence felt clean, almost luxurious, and that made him suspicious of it. On the rug beside the bed, Sable lifted his head. The German shepherd's coat cream, layered with gray and black, caught the thin light in soft gradients. 5 years old, trained enough to move like he understood choreography. Sable watched Rowan with amber eyes that held no panic, but only awareness. He didn't rise immediately. He waited, as if checking whether the day was safe to enter. Rowan sat up slowly, testing his shoulder. A dull stiffness answered him. Not pain exactly, but a reminder that time was still doing its work. He dragged a hand over his jaw, feeling the roughness of stubble. He would shave later. He always did. Some rituals weren't about appearance, they were about control, and he needed that more than he needed comfort. He dressed in the same worn kit that made him feel continuous with himself. The old olive-gray tactical combat shirt softened by years, the red thermal beneath it a shade brighter like an ember hidden under ash. The faded combat pants with frayed knees and heavy pockets that sagged from use. The scuffed work boots, the old military watch that kept time without drama. Nothing new. Nothing glossy. A man in this outfit didn't look like he was trying to impress anyone. He looked like he'd stopped believing he needed to. Outside, was frost stitched the grass in fine silver threads. The air bit cleanly, and his breath came out white. Sable trotted alongside him, harness black with a dark red trim, the handle on his back lying flat like a promise. If something went wrong, there was always something to grab onto. Rowan drove back to Alderwick Lodge without music. He didn't need sound to fill the space. His mind did that on its own. It replayed yesterday in fragments, not the lobby's polished warmth, not the controlled smiles, but the architecture of the place, the schedule grids, the way staff moved as if time itself were an overseer, the small, almost secret signals that meant more than anyone wanted to admit. He arrived mid-morning. The lodge greeted him with the same curated ease, cedar and citrus, warmth that felt measured, fire behind glass like even flame had rules. Today, he didn't start where guests wandered. He requested access to operations oversight, and Dorian Kessler granted it with the kind of polite confidence that suggested he loved being observed because he believed observation would vindicate him. Dorian met Rowan near the administrative corridor. He was 46, clean-shaven, hair combed back with deliberate neatness, suit pressed so sharply it looked like it had never been sat in. His face was smooth in a way that didn't come from youth but from practice at being the kind of man who never appeared rattled. Pale eyes, gray with a faint green undertone, looked at Rowan like a spreadsheet looks at a number. Not hostile, just evaluating. "Mr. Hale," Dorian said, voice calm as a locked door. "I hope you slept well." "Well enough?" "Excellent. Our operations analyst will walk you through the dashboard. You'll find it comprehensive." Rowan didn't smile. "That's what I'm here to verify." The administrative area sat behind a keypad door that opened with a soft beep, as if the building itself spoke in muted tones. Inside, while the lighting cooled, the air smelled less like cedar and more like plastic and filtered ventilation. A wall of monitors filled one side of the room, graphs, lists, color-coded indicators, time stamps that made human activity look like a weather report. A young woman sat at the central workstation and glanced up as they entered. Her name tag read, Lena Alvarez. Late 20s, slim build, olive skin, dark straight hair falling to her shoulders in a practical cut. Thin-framed glasses sat on her nose. Her expression was focused, not unfriendly but not inviting either, the face of someone who lived in data and trusted it more than people. "Mr. Hale," she said, voice neutral. "Operations analyst." Rowan nodded. "Thanks for your time." Her eyes flicked to Sable, registering the dog's presence with a brief tightening around her mouth caution, then acceptance. Sable stood quietly beside Rowan, ears forward, gaze scanning, and the harness snug across his chest. He didn't strain at the leash, didn't posture. He was simply there, a steady animal in a room full of numbers. Lena turned back to her keyboard. This is the activity grid. We track movement consistency, task completion, and idle threshold deviations. Green indicates optimal flow. Amber indicates slowdown beyond baseline. And red? Rowan asked. Lena's fingers paused for a fraction of a second before moving again. Red indicates escalation. Dorian, behind them, spoke as if offering a philosophy rather than a policy. We believe structure improves outcomes. Standards require accountability. Rowan watched the screen. Names scrolled in columns. Departments. Timestamps. Small bursts of amber flickering beside certain employees, then returning to green. The lodge's soul, distilled into color. He found the line he hadn't wanted to find. Maris Q. The indicator beside her name flickered amber more often than others. Rowan kept his voice even. What's the idle threshold? 45 seconds, Lena replied. Shorter in certain conditions. Such as? Lena's gaze shifted quickly, almost involuntarily to Dorian. Night parameters and designated zones. Rowan filed it away. Not a confession. Not evidence. But a seam. He wasn't here to argue. He was here to see the system the way the system saw people. Then the grid stuttered. A burst of red pulsed beside Maris Q. For barely 3 seconds, bright enough to catch the eye like blood in snow. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, returning to green as if the system had corrected itself. Rowan didn't move. His face stayed still. But Sable stepped forward, slow and deliberate, placing himself between Rowan and the monitor. His ears flattened, not in fear, but in distress, and a low, almost inaudible whine escaped his throat, the kind of sound dogs make when they sense pain they can't reach. Lena's hands froze above the keys. That's unusual, she murmured, softer than she'd spoken all morning. Rowan's voice remained calm. What triggers red? Lena swallowed. Pulse correction. Dorian's tone didn't change. A haptic compliance function. Non-injurious. It's guidance. Rowan stared at the screen, as if the answer were a coordinate he could navigate by. Guidance. That was the word people used when they didn't want to say control. Sable didn't relax when the red disappeared. He stayed in front of Rowan, steady, as if shielding him from something only the dog understood. The moment a person becomes a metric, pain can be justified by performance. Rowan placed a hand on Sable's back. The dog's fur was warm, alive, anchored in the real. That warmth cut through the sterile logic of the room. Rowan asked quietly, "Where is correction data stored?" Lena's eyes dropped to the keyboard. Locally mirrored. Remote backup nightly. Access? Restricted, she said. Management level. Dorian smiled faintly. We keep things secure. Rowan nodded once, as if satisfied, then stepped back. Pressing now would tip his hand. People like Dorian didn't panic. They tightened. He left administrative without confrontation. The hallway outside felt warmer, but only because it wasn't full of screens. He moved toward the staff corridor. The air changed there. Laundry detergent, steam, the faint metallic tang of cleaning chemicals. In the laundry area, Maris stood sorting linens, folding with fast hands, her posture tight as wire. Up close, she looked more exhausted than she had yesterday. Not dramatized exhaustion, no theatrical sagging shoulders, just the kind that lives in the shadows under the eyes and the tiny tremor at the fingertips. The device at her throat sat against her collarbone like an unblinking eye. There was faint discoloration beneath it, not raw, not dramatic, but present. Rowan approached slowly, letting his footsteps be audible so he wouldn't startle her. "Morning." Maris didn't look up right away. "Morning?" she said, voice controlled. Sable sat down a short distance away, facing her. He didn't stare like a predator. He watched like a guardian who didn't know how else to help. Rowan kept his tone casual. "How long have you been here?" Maris folded a sheet with sharp, practiced movements. 4 months? And the pace is always like this? She hesitated, just a breath too long. The device gave a faint vibration. Her hands moved faster, as if speed could undo the pause. "We follow the schedule," she said. Rowan's eyes flicked to the lanyard. "You get breaks?" "Scheduled." "And in practice?" Her jaw tightened. "In practice, we manage." The word manage landed heavy. It wasn't pride, it was survival. Rowan's chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with his shoulder. "Does it?" he began, then stopped. He chose his words like he chose routes on a map, carefully, with respect for unseen minds. "Does the device ever hurt you?" Maris's hands clenched on the linen. She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes flicked toward the corridor behind Rowan, checking for witnesses. Sable rose and took one step closer, then sat again, calm and steady. His presence was an anchor, a quiet reminder that someone was here who didn't speak in threats. Maris exhaled, shallow. "It's just a reminder." Rowan didn't argue with her denial. Denial was a shield that had kept her alive this long. He only said, softly, "You don't have to prove anything to me." She swallowed. For the first time, her eyes lifted fully to his. In them was something Rowan recognized from places far from this lodge. The look of someone who had learned that truth can be dangerous. She didn't ask him to help. She didn't accuse him of watching. She only looked, as if trying to decide whether he was real. The device vibrated again, faint, insistent. Maris flinched, small and automatic, then forced her hands to keep moving. Rowan stepped back. Not because he didn't care, but because care could feel like surveillance when you'd been controlled. He gave her space, like an offering. As he turned away, Sable hesitated, looking back at Maris with amber-eyed concern. His tail moved once, slow, not wagging, more like a gesture of acknowledgement. "I see you." Rowan reached the end of the corridor and paused by a window overlooking the grounds. Outside, guests laughed on the lawn, scarves bright against patches of snow. From here, Alderwick looked like refuge. Inside, time was chopped into measurable fragments, and rest was treated like failure. Rowan breathed out slowly. He had come to assess risk. He was beginning to understand that the risk wasn't intruders or fire rotes. It was a philosophy. And philosophies, unlike locked doors, could spread. He glanced down at Sable. The dog looked back, steady. Rowan's voice was barely above a breath. Not yet. He wasn't ready to move, but he was ready to see. Rowan left Alderwick as the sun began to slide toward afternoon, turning the snow patches along the lawn into pale mirrors. From a distance, the lodge looked like what people paid for when they wanted to believe life could be managed. Warm windows, clean lines, a promise of comfort framed by northern wilderness. Up close, It had felt different, less like refuge, and more like a machine that had learned to imitate a home. On the drive back to his cabin, Rowan kept the heat low. He wanted to feel the edge of the cold. It sharpened his thoughts. It reminded him that bodies weren't meant to be optimized like spreadsheets. They were meant to be lived in. Sable lay on the passenger seat with his chin resting on his paws, eyes half-lidded but not asleep. The dog's ears twitched at every change in the road's sound, the crunch of gravel, or the hiss of tires over wet asphalt. He was calm, but his calm carried memory. Rowan had seen the way Sable reacted to the pulse correction on the dashboard. The dog had recognized something human in it. The taste of pain wrapped in policy. At the cabin, Rowan fed Sable, then made coffee strong enough to feel like an apology to his nervous system. He sat at the small table and wrote notes the way he'd learned to write them in the field, short, precise, unemotional. He listed what he'd seen, what he'd heard, what he couldn't yet prove. He didn't write abuse. He wrote behavioral compliance tool. He didn't write fear. He wrote somatic response to device activation. Language mattered. It was how you made truth portable. His phone buzzed. Gage Mercer's name lit the screen. Rowan answered. "Yeah. You sound like you didn't enjoy the tour," Gage said, but his humor was thin. "It's organized," Rowan replied. "Yeah," Gage said, and there was a pause that carried something heavier. That's the problem, isn't it? You can't argue with organized." Rowan stared at his notebook. "Did you ever see anyone get hurt?" Gage inhaled slowly. "Not openly. Nothing you can point to and call a crime. But I saw a housekeeper once, young woman flinch when her lanyard buzzed, like it was more than a reminder." Rowan didn't mention Maris. He didn't mention the dashboard. He said, "Did you say anything?" Another pause. "No," Gage admitted, voice quieter. "I told myself it wasn't my job. And I told myself if it was really bad, someone else would handle it. I've been thinking about that ever since." Rowan's chest tightened, not in judgment, but in recognition. Men told themselves stories to survive. Some stories were just prettier versions of cowardice. "I'll call you later," Rowan said. "Rowan," Gage added quickly, "be careful. That place it doesn't do messy. If you push, it'll get quiet." Rowan ended the call and sat with the coffee cooling in his cup. Outside, as the lake shifted under wind, the surface catching light and losing it again, the world did what it wanted. Alderwick did what it planned. He slept badly that night. Not because of nightmares. He rarely dreamed the way civilians described it. His mind didn't replay scenes. It ran simulations. It kept building outcomes, testing risk, trying to predict where the threat would come from. He woke once at 2:17 a.m., with his heart steady, but his body alert, as if some part of him had heard a sound that wasn't there. Sable stood at the foot of the bed, watching the door. Rowan whispered, "What is it?" Sable didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply waited, still as a statue, ears forward. Rowan listened until he heard it too. Nothing. Just wind, distant and soft. The dog finally lay down again, but Rowan didn't fall back asleep easily. Morning came pale and cold. Rowan returned to Alderwick with the intention of observing Dorian in motion, how he spoke to staff when no guests were watching, and how he moved through the building when he thought he was invisible. Some men performed kindness, others performed authority. Dorian performed certainty. The lodge was busier today. A corporate retreat had arrived. Men and women with matching jackets and energetic voices, carrying laptops like shields. Their laughter was loud enough to make the staff seem even quieter by contrast. Rowan moved through public spaces and drifted toward the staff corridor like he belonged there. It wasn't difficult. People tended to assume confidence was authorization. Near the side entrance, he saw Noah Briggs again. Young, sandy-haired, slightly too thin in the shoulders, like he'd grown fast and never filled into himself. Noah was carrying a crate of bottled water. His lanyard bounced lightly against his chest, device resting at his collarbone. He moved at a quick, practiced pace, but his eyes flicked constantly toward the nearest clock. Rowan approached him as if checking a camera angle. "You in school?" he asked, keeping it casual. Noah blinked. "Yeah, state college, business track." "Why here?" Noah shifted the crate, forcing a smile. "Money's better, and it's structured." Rowan watched him carefully. "You like the structure?" Noah's smile tightened. "It keeps people from slacking." Rowan didn't correct him. He understood what that sentence was, a borrowed belief, the kind you repeat until it becomes a defense against discomfort. Sable walked past Noah, sniffed once, and continued. No alarm. But the dog's tail stayed low, thoughtful. Rowan moved onward. He wasn't looking for proof yet. He was looking for the shape of the ideology. He found Dorian in a hallway near the staff wing, speaking quietly to Lena Alvarez. Dorian's suit was immaculate as ever. Lena stood with her tablet held close to her chest like armor. Her dark hair fell straight, her glasses catching the overhead light. She nodded when Dorian spoke, but her shoulders were tense. Rowan slowed, as lingering out of direct line of sight. "I don't care what the manual recommends," Dorian was saying, voice low but firm. "If the overnight sensitivity isn't high enough, we adjust it. People rest too much if you let them." Lena's mouth tightened. "It increases false positives. It flags normal stillness." Dorian's expression didn't change. Stillness is the point. Stillness is where they drift, and drift is where standards die. Rowan felt something cold settle beneath his ribs. Dorian wasn't using the system because he enjoyed cruelty. He was using it because he believed the world would fall apart without control. That belief was harder to fight than malice. Dorian noticed Rowan then, turning with a smooth smile as if the conversation had been about flowers. "Mr. Hale," he said warmly, "how are we finding Alderwick today?" "Efficient," Rowan replied. Dorian's eyes brightened slightly. "Exactly. Efficiency is kindness. It removes uncertainty." Rowan studied him. Up close, Dorian's face showed no nervous habits, no fidgeting, no blinking too often. The only softness in him was his ease. He had built a world where his ease came at someone else's cost, and he had convinced himself that was leadership. "Do you ever worry," Rowan asked, voice calm, "that people might perform well out of fear rather than pride?" Dorian laughed softly, as if Rowan had told a charming joke. "Fear is a crude motivator. We don't deal in fear. We deal in consequence. People respond to consequence. It's human nature." Rowan didn't argue. He simply nodded. "And if consequence causes harm?" Dorian's smile thinned, just slightly. "Harm is subjective. Productivity is measurable." There it was, the gospel. Rowan felt his shoulder ache, a dull reminder of another doctrine. Pain can be endured, but it should never be normalized. Dorian excused himself with a pleasant nod and walked away, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive cologne and certainty. Rowan stood for a moment in the corridor, hearing the soft hum of ventilation above him. Sable sat at his heel, watching the direction Dorian had gone, ears angled forward. The dog didn't growl. He didn't need to. His stillness was commentary enough. Rowan turned toward the laundry corridor and stopped. Maris was there, carrying a basket of linens. She moved quickly, eyes down, the device at her throat resting against her collarbone like a cold coin. But what caught Rowan wasn't her pace. It was the way her fingers kept brushing the same spot on her neck again and again, as if she were checking whether the device was still there, even though it obviously was. A compulsive gesture. A phantom itch made real by fear. Sable noticed before Rowan did. The dog stepped forward, slow and careful, and nudged Maris's hand gently away from her throat with his nose. Not forceful, not possessive, just a quiet interruption. Maris froze. For half a second, her eyes widened, and something in her face crumpled. Not into tears, but into the raw, startled look of someone whose body has been touched without permission for too long, and no longer knows the difference between care and control. Then she saw it was the dog. Her breath left her in a shaky exhale. She didn't smile. She didn't thank him. But her shoulders dropped, just a fraction, as if Sable's calm had reminded her that not every contact was a threat. The moment lasted only a few seconds. Then her device vibrated faintly, and her body snapped back into motion. But Rowan had seen it. And more importantly, Sable had chosen her again. Not like fate, like instinct, like justice that didn't need words. The rest of the day confirmed what Rowan already understood. Alderwick's staff had been trained to treat rest as a risk. But they moved in constant small shifts, never still long enough to be accused of drifting. Chairs in the staff lounge sat mostly empty. A break table held untouched snacks like props in a room no one used. Rowan watched Etta in the kitchen, moving with practiced efficiency, but even she, stubborn, solid Etta, didn't sit. She leaned only briefly against a counter, then straightened as if the act might be recorded. The system was everywhere, even when it wasn't visible. Late afternoon, Rowan ended his formal walkthrough with Dorian. He kept his tone neutral, his questions professional. He did not accuse. He did not threaten. He simply observed, stored, measured. Outside, the northern air hit his face like truth, cold, clean, undeniable. He walked toward his truck with Sable at his side and felt something settle inside him that was not a plan yet, but the beginning of one. Dorian believed he was right, and people who believed they were right could justify almost anything. Rowan started the engine and drove away, the lodge shrinking behind him in the rearview mirror like a polished lie. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt responsible, and responsibility, he knew, was a heavier thing than anger. The snow came quietly that night, the kind that didn't announce itself with wind or drama. It simply arrived, soft and patient, layering the ground outside Rowan's cabin in white until the world looked less sharp, less certain. He watched it through the window while Sable lay stretched on the floor, head on his paws, eyes half closed, but alert in the way that meant rest was provisional. Rowan hadn't turned on the television. He hadn't opened the laptop. He sat at the table with a mug gone cold in his hands, staring at notes he no longer needed to read to remember. Dorian's voice echoed in his head. Efficiency is kindness. The phrase bothered him more than threats ever had. Threats were honest. They admitted they were dangerous. Ideas like that pretended to be merciful. He slept in short stretches, waking whenever the silence felt too deliberate. At one point, close to dawn, Sable lifted his head and looked toward the door, ears angled forward. Rowan listened, breath held. Nothing. Just the slow creak of wood contracting in the cold. The dog settled again, but Rowan stayed awake, eyes open, waiting for morning like a line he was no longer sure he wanted to cross. By the time he drove back to Alderwick, the sky was pale and overcast, the kind of light that flattened shadows and made everything feel exposed. The lodge rose out of the snow like it always did, clean, composed, untroubled by weather or conscience. Inside, the rhythm was already underway. Staff moved through corridors with the same controlled urgency Rowan had come to recognize. Shoes didn't scuff. Voices stayed low. No one lingered at doorways. The system was invisible if you didn't know how to look for it, which was precisely the point. Rowan didn't head for administrative. He didn't seek out Dorian. Today he stayed in the margins, letting the lodge forget he was watching. He stood near the service entrance and observed patterns, counted seconds between pauses, noticed how often hands drifted toward lanyards before snapping back to task. Maris appeared mid-morning, pushing a cart stacked with fresh linens. She looked paler than before, dark hair pulled tight, skin under her eyes faintly bruised with fatigue. The device at her throat rested against her collarbone, black and discreet, as if designed by someone who understood aesthetics as a form of compliance. She didn't see Rowan at first. Sable did. The dog rose slowly, tail low but steady, and moved a few steps closer. He didn't block her path. He didn't intrude. He simply aligned himself with her movement, close enough to be present, far enough not to trigger alarm. His amber eyes tracked her face with quiet intensity. Maris noticed him and startled, and then recognized the dog and exhaled sharply, as if she'd been holding her breath without realizing it. Her hand lifted toward her throat and stopped halfway, fingers hovering, unsure. Rowan stepped into view. "Morning," she nodded. "Morning." Her voice sounded thinner today, stretched tight over something brittle. "You look tired," he said, keeping his tone neutral. She gave a small, humorless smile. "It's a busy place." That was true. It just wasn't the whole truth. A faint vibration rippled from her lanyard. Not sharp, not corrective, just a warning. Her shoulders stiffened, and she adjusted her grip on the cart, rolling it forward a step, even though she didn't need to. Rowan felt something settle in his chest, heavy and certain. This wasn't about rules anymore. It was about bodies being trained to obey before thought could intervene. He let her pass without pressing, but as she moved away, Sable turned his head and watched her go, and ears tilted back in concern. The dog didn't understand systems, but he understood distress. He always had. Rowan followed the corridor in the opposite direction, toward the staff lounge. The room was clean, functional, and almost entirely unused. Chairs lined the walls. A table held a bowl of wrapped snacks no one touched. A clock ticked loudly enough to make the silence feel intentional. Etta stood near the counter, wiping it down with slow, methodical movements. She was broad-shouldered and solid, gray hair pulled back tight, her face a map of years spent working without complaint. She noticed Rowan and nodded once, acknowledging him like an equal rather than a superior. "They don't sit," she said quietly, without preamble. Rowan glanced at the empty chairs. "Why not?" Etta shrugged. "Sitting looks like stopping. Stopping looks like trouble." How long has it been like this? She wiped the counter again, harder this time. Long enough that people forget what it felt like before. Rowan absorbed that. Forgetting was always the real danger. Pain could be endured. Fear could be fought. But forgetting changed you. A muffled sound echoed down the corridor, a sharper vibration this time, followed by a quick, involuntary gasp. Rowan turned toward it instinctively. Sable was already moving. The sound came from the laundry area. Rowan followed at a brisk walk, heart steady but alert, the way it had been in other buildings, other lives. He reached the doorway in time to see Maris standing frozen beside a metal table, hands clenched at her sides. Her face was drained of color, eyes unfocused, as if she were looking through the room rather than at it. The lanyard at her throat pulsed again, sharper now. Sable stepped between her and the table, body angled toward her, grounding without force. He pressed his side lightly against her leg, solid and warm. She swayed, just barely, then caught herself, breath hitching. "Maris," Rowan said, voice low and calm. "Look at me." Her eyes flicked toward him, unfocused, then sharpened as if she'd surfaced from deep water. I stopped," she said, words tumbling out too fast. "Just for a second. I was counting the sheets and—" The device vibrated again, louder this time, the warning escalating. Rowan felt the moment crystallize. He knew what came next. So did she. She shook her head, panic finally breaking through her composure. "Please," she whispered, not to him, not to anyone in particular, just to the air. I'm moving. She took a step, then another. Too fast, too uncoordinated. The device emitted a sharp pulse. Maris cried out, a short, strangled sound, and doubled over slightly, one hand clutching her throat, the other bracing against the table. Sable reacted instantly, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Not aggressive, but furious in a way Rowan had rarely heard from him. The dog planted himself beside Maris, body tense, the eyes fixed on the device as if it were a living thing he could challenge. Rowan didn't think. He acted. "Enough," he said, loud enough to cut through the hum of the room. The word wasn't a command to the system. It was a promise to himself. He stepped forward, positioning his body between Maris and the nearest sensor, blocking line of sight without making it obvious. His hands were steady as he reached toward the lanyard, not grabbing, not yanking, just touching enough to feel the faint vibration humming against his fingers. Maris flinched. "You can't," she said, fear sharpening her voice. "It'll flag." "It already has," Rowan replied quietly. "That doesn't change anything." He looked around the room. No one had rushed in yet. The system relied on automation, not immediate human intervention. That delay was its weakness. Sable pressed closer to Maris, his presence anchoring her as her breathing stuttered and slowed. The dog's eyes never left Rowan's hands, trusting him in a way that felt heavier than any order Rowan had ever given. Rowan reached into his pocket and pulled out the small multi-tool he carried out of habit, not anticipation. He didn't open the blade. He used the flat edge, sliding it carefully under the clasp at the back of Maris's neck. The device buzzed, insistent, confused. Maris shook, tears spilling now, silent and unstoppable. "Please don't," she whispered. "They'll know. They'll—" Rowan met her eyes. "They already do." He applied pressure, precise and controlled. The clasp snapped. The vibration cut off abruptly, the sudden silence louder than any alarm. Maris sagged forward, knees buckling. Sable shifted instantly, bracing her weight, keeping her upright as she clutched the front of his harness, fingers digging into the fabric like it was the only solid thing left in the world. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then footsteps echoed in the corridor. Dorian appeared in the doorway, his composed expression fracturing for the first time. His eyes dropped to the broken lanyard in Rowan's hand, then to Maris, clinging to the dog, then back to Rowan. "What have you done?" Dorian demanded, voice tight with something that sounded dangerously close to outrage. Rowan straightened slowly. His heart was calm. His voice was steadier than it had any right to be. "I stopped a system from hurting someone." Dorian's jaw clenched. "You interfered with an active compliance protocol. That device is property of a process that just caused physical harm," Rowan cut in front of witnesses, including me. Etta stood behind Dorian now, her face pale, eyes wide but resolute. Lena hovered near the edge of the hall, tablet forgotten at her side, shock plain on her features. Dorian took a breath, visibly collecting himself. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, tone smoothing. "The system is non-injurious. It's—" Maris lifted her head then, eyes red but clear in a way Rowan hadn't seen before. "It hurts," she said. Her voice shook, but it didn't waver. "It hurts every time." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Sable let out a low, steady breath, his growl fading into something calmer, as if the truth itself had eased his tension. Rowan looked at Dorian. "This stops, now." For the first time since Rowan had met him, Dorian didn't smile. The corridor felt smaller, the air thicker, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Rowan knew this moment would change everything. There was no going back to observation. And he didn't want to. No one applauded. There was no alarm, no flashing light, no dramatic announcement when the device fell silent in Rowan's hand. What followed the snap of plastic and circuitry was something far more unsettling. A stillness so complete it felt like the lodge itself had paused to reconsider its own logic. Maris stood trembling, fingers twisted in Sable's harness, her breathing uneven, but no longer interrupted by vibration. The broken lanyard lay against Rowan's palm like an object stripped of authority. It was smaller than it had felt a moment ago. Lighter. Ordinary. Dorian recovered first. His composure did not return all at once. It reassembled piece by piece, like a man putting on a suit in the dark. "You've made a serious mistake," he said quietly. Rowan did not raise his voice. "No, I corrected one." Around them, but the corridor held witnesses. Etta stood near the doorway, arms crossed, not in defiance but in something steadier. Lena lingered at the edge of the scene, tablet lowered, eyes moving rapidly between Rowan and the damaged device. Noah had appeared behind her, pale and silent, as if unsure whether to step forward or vanish. Maris slowly released her grip on Sable. Her hand dropped from the dog's harness and hovered in the air for a second, uncertain where to go without a signal telling it what to do. She touched her collarbone, where the device had rested. Her skin there was faintly marked reddened in a narrow arc. She did not speak again. She didn't need to. Dorian took a measured step forward. "The system is proprietary," he said, tone even. "Tampering with it constitutes interference with operational protocol." Rowan met his gaze. "Then document it." Dorian's jaw flexed. He was a man accustomed to compliance, not defiance. But even now, what flashed across his face wasn't rage. It was disbelief, the kind that comes when reality refuses to follow the model. "Lena," Dorian said, not looking away from Rowan. "Initiate review." Lena hesitated. Up close, she looked younger than her confidence suggested. There were faint dark crescents under her eyes, the kind left by long hours in artificial light. Her dark hair framed a face that had grown accustomed to screens. She held the tablet like it might burn her. "Sir?" she began, voice controlled but strained. The device was flagged under escalation. "I am aware," Dorian replied. "It exceeded standard output." That word lingered, exceeded. Rowan filed it away. Dorian's eyes flicked toward her, warning without raising his voice. "Run the review." Lena tapped the screen. Somewhere above them, a muted chime echoed through the building, soft, administrative. Not an alarm. A notation. The system had acknowledged the disruption. And then, nothing. But no security rushed in. No automatic lockdown engaged. The lodge returned to its rhythm, as if this corridor were not the axis on which it had just turned. Rowan stepped back from Maris, giving her physical space. Sable remained close to her side, posture upright but relaxed, his body radiating a steady warmth that seemed to anchor her in place. "Take a breath," Rowan said quietly. She did. It was the first full breath he had seen her take. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. The tightness in her jaw eased. She looked down at her empty hands, as if trying to remember what they did when they weren't reacting. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, barely audible. "That's okay," Rowan replied. "You don't have to do anything right now." The absence of instruction confused her. It showed in the way her eyes darted, not to Rowan, not to Dorian, but to the walls, the ceiling, as if waiting for the next cue. When none came, something inside her shifted. Not healed, but interrupted. Dorian cleared his throat. "Ms. Quinn, you are relieved of duty for the remainder of the shift." The sentence sounded generous. It was not. Maris stiffened. "Am I terminated?" she asked. There it was, the fear Dorian's philosophy relied upon. "Pending review," he answered. Rowan stepped forward slightly. "She'll be leaving with me." Dorian's gaze sharpened. "On what authority?" "The authority of medical observation," Rowan said calmly. "You don't want escalation documented as injury." Dorian studied him. The air between them felt like a chessboard. Finally, he inclined his head. "Temporary." The word was a concession disguised as control. Rowan turned to Maris. "Get your coat." She hesitated only a second before nodding. As she walked away down the corridor, her steps were slower than usual. Not forced, not hurried. Simply unpracticed in moving without a timer measuring them. Sable followed her, glancing back once to ensure Rowan was still there. Outside, the cold air struck Maris like truth, and she stopped just beyond the lodge doors, eyes closing briefly as snowflakes drifted against her hair. Her coat was thin, practical, but not insulated for lingering. Rowan removed his own heavier jacket without comment and placed it around her shoulders. She flinched at the contact, then stilled. "It's just fabric," he said softly. She nodded, embarrassed by the reflex. They stood in silence for a moment. Snow softened the world around them, muting edges, erasing footprints almost as soon as they were made. "Where will you take me?" she asked. "Nowhere dramatic," Rowan replied. "Somewhere quiet." She looked at Sable, who stood beside her, tail still, eyes attentive. "He stayed," she said, almost to herself. "He doesn't leave people when they're hurting," Rowan answered. Something like understanding passed between them. As Rowan opened the truck door, Sable suddenly froze, not in aggression, in attention. His ears angled sharply toward the lodge entrance. Rowan followed his line of sight. Dorian stood inside the glass doors, watching. He did not step out into the snow. He did not call after them. He simply observed, hands clasped behind his back, posture immaculate against the backdrop of warm interior light. From this distance, he looked smaller, but not defeated. Sable held his gaze for a long, unwavering second. Then, slowly, deliberately, the dog turned his back on him. It was a simple movement, but it carried the quiet certainty of judgment. Rowan felt it in his chest. Not triumph, not victory, but alignment. Something irreversible had just shifted, and Dorian knew it. The drive to Rowan's cabin was quiet. Maris sat stiffly in the passenger seat, hands clasped in her lap, eyes fixed on the road ahead. The absence of vibration seemed to unsettle her more than its presence ever had. Twice, her fingers rose unconsciously to her throat, touching the bare skin where the device had rested. It's gone, Rowan said gently. She nodded. I know. But knowing and believing were different things. At the cabin, she paused at the doorway, as if expecting an invisible censor to demand justification for entering. Rowan stepped aside. There's no system here, he said. She crossed the threshold slowly. Inside, the air smelled of pine and coffee. The space was simple. Table, stove, 2 chairs, a narrow bed, a rug where Sable usually slept. No screens, no blinking lights. Maris stood in the center of the room and did nothing. For the first time since Rowan had met her, she simply stood. 10 seconds passed. 20. 30. She didn't flinch. She didn't move. Her breathing deepened gradually, chest rising and falling without interruption. Sable lay down near her feet, chin resting on his paws, watching her with quiet vigilance. After nearly a minute, she exhaled sharply and covered her mouth with her hand. I thought it would buzz, she whispered. Rowan leaned against the wall, arms crossed loosely. It won't. She lowered her hand slowly. I didn't realize, she said, voice thick, how much I was waiting for it. Waiting for pain, waiting for correction, waiting for permission to exist. Rowan didn't offer reassurance. He didn't tell her she was safe. He let the silence do that. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside, time passed without measurement. And for the first time since the lodge had begun shaping her into data, Maris experienced something dangerously radical. Stillness. Morning arrived without urgency. Snow had settled thick around the cabin during the night, muting the world into something almost tender. The trees stood burdened and patient, their branches bowed but unbroken. Light filtered through the frosted window in a pale wash that made the room feel less like a shelter and more like a pause. Maris woke before Rowan. She did not realize she had been asleep until she noticed the absence of tension in her shoulders. For a moment, she lay still, staring at the ceiling, waiting for vibration, waiting for correction. Nothing came. Her hand rose automatically toward her throat and hovered there, fingers brushing skin that was cool and unmarked, except for the faint crescent where the device had rested for months. The skin was no longer tender, but her body did not yet trust that. On the rug near the bed, Sable opened one amber eye. He did not move toward her immediately. He watched. When her breathing quickened, he stood, stretched slowly, and crossed the small room in unhurried steps. He rested his chin lightly against the edge of the mattress, gaze steady, ears relaxed. It was not a command. It was an offering. Maris met his eyes. You're still here, she whispered. His tail moved once against the wooden floor. The sound was soft and grounding. Rowan stirred from the chair where he had fallen asleep, boots still on, back against the wall. He had not meant to drift off, but exhaustion had caught him at the edges. He blinked, taking in the scene. Maris upright in the bed, Sable beside her, morning light carving gentle lines across the room. "You sleep?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "I didn't wake up," she said, as if confessing something fragile. "Not even once." Rowan rose slowly, and testing the stiffness in his shoulder. "That's good." She looked at him carefully. "Is it?" He held her gaze. "It's yours." The word landed softly, but firmly. She stood from the bed and crossed the cabin. Each step was cautious at first, like someone learning a new floor plan. She paused near the small table, hands resting against its edge. And then she stopped. Not because she was forced to. Because she chose to. 10 seconds passed. 20. 30. Her breathing remained steady. The silence held. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, there were tears there. Not sharp or frantic, but slow and inevitable. "I didn't realize how loud it was," she said, "until it wasn't." Rowan didn't answer. He knew what she meant. Some sounds burrowed so deep into a person that their absence felt unnatural. He moved to the stove and lit it, the click of ignition startling in its ordinariness. Coffee soon filled the room with a scent that felt human rather than institutional. Maris wrapped her hands around the mug he offered. The warmth startled her almost as much as the silence had. Outside, the snow continued to fall, indifferent to systems and protocols. A knock sounded at the cabin door. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just deliberate. Maris stiffened instantly. Her shoulders locked, her breath shortening, body reverting to the posture Rowan had first seen in the lodge. Sable rose from the rug in one fluid motion, ears forward, posture alert, but not hostile. Rowan crossed to the door and opened it carefully. Gage Mercer stood outside. He looked older than Rowan remembered, mid-40s. Stockier now, dark beard threaded with gray, eyes lined by years of decisions he'd made too quickly and regrets he'd carried too long. His coat was dusted with snow, boots heavy, posture uncertain. He removed his gloves slowly. "I heard," he said. Rowan stepped aside. Gage entered, glancing around the cabin as if assessing it for threats that weren't there. His gaze fell on Maris, then shifted away out of respect. "You okay?" he asked her gently. She hesitated, then answered honestly. "I don't know yet." Gage nodded once. "Fair." He looked at Rowan. "Dorian's contained it for now. Corporate hasn't responded. But they will." Rowan leaned against the wall. "He won't escalate publicly." "No," Gage agreed. "He'll call it a procedural review. Keep it clean." Maris listened carefully. "Am I fired?" she asked. Gage's jaw tightened. "Officially? Pending investigation? Unofficially? You've made it inconvenient for them." Her fingers tightened around the mug. Sable moved closer to her side, pressing lightly against her leg. Gage noticed the dog then. He crouched slightly, extending a hand slowly. Sable watched him with focused eyes, then sniffed once and allowed the contact. "He's solid," Gage said. "He knows," Rowan replied. Gage stood again. "There's something else." He glanced toward the window, and as if the trees might overhear. 2 more staff asked about their devices this morning. Maris looked up sharply. "They did?" "Yeah," Gage said, quietly. "But they asked." Something flickered across her face, fear, yes, but also something Rowan had not yet seen there. Recognition that she was not alone. Sable suddenly lifted his head, ears pivoting toward the door again, not at a knock this time, but at something subtler. A vehicle passed slowly on the road outside the cabin. Not a lodge vehicle. A dark sedan, tires crunching deliberately over fresh snow. It did not stop. It did not speed, it simply passed. Sable's gaze followed it through the window until it disappeared between the trees. He did not bark. He did not growl. He simply watched until it was gone. Rowan felt the shift in the air, the sense of being seen without confrontation. Gage exhaled slowly. They're watching. Maris's hands trembled, but she did not move from where she stood. This time, she did not reach for her throat. She reached for the edge of the table and steadied herself. Inside the cabin, time resumed its human pace. Gage left after an hour, promising to keep Rowan informed. His boots tracked melting snow across the floor. Rowan didn't mind. The mess felt real, unsanitized. Maris sat at the table long after the door closed. "What happens now?" she asked. Rowan considered the question carefully. "Now," he said, "you decide." She looked at him as if he'd offered her something too large to carry. "Decide what? Whether you go back? Whether you fight? Whether you walk away?" She stared at her hands. "I don't know how to fight." Rowan shook his head gently. "You already did." She thought about that. The snow outside thickened, the world narrowing to the cabin and the trees around it. "I thought the system was me," she said finally. "I thought if I moved faster, did better, it would stop hurting." "That's how systems like that work," Rowan replied quietly. They make you believe the pain is personal." She nodded slowly. Sable rested his chin against her knee. This time, she didn't flinch. She placed her hand on his head, fingers threading through fur with deliberate gentleness. He closed his eyes briefly, leaning into the contact. The gesture was small, but it was chosen. Hours passed without schedule. No vibration, no correction. Just the steady rhythm of breath and snow and coffee cooling in cups that no one felt pressured to finish. Late afternoon light shifted gold against the white landscape. Maris stood again and walked to the window. She did not check for sensors. She did not glance at the clock. She simply stood and watched the snow fall. 30 seconds. A minute. 2. Nothing happened. Behind her, Rowan observed quietly. Sable rose and joined her, sitting at her side as if keeping watch. Not over her, but with her. Maris let out a slow breath. "I want to go back," she said. Rowan did not react immediately. "Not to comply," she added. "To stand." The word was soft, but it carried weight. Rowan nodded once. "That's your choice." She turned from the window, eyes steadier than he had ever seen them. Outside, the world remained white and unmeasured. Inside, the cabin held a new kind of quiet. Not the enforced silence of compliance, but the deliberate stillness of someone who had remembered she was allowed to exist without earning it. Sable remained at her side, not as a guard, as a witness. And for now, that was enough. Sometimes miracles do not arrive as light in the sky or thunder in the distance. Sometimes they arrive quietly, in the courage to stand still when the world demands you keep moving. Sometimes they arrive through a loyal dog who senses pain before words can name it. And sometimes they arrive through a person who refuses to look away. God does not always remove the storm. Often, He sends strength in the middle of it. He places people in our path at the exact moment we need them, not by accident, but by purpose. What happened in this story is not just about one lodge, one system, or one broken device. It is about the sacred truth that no human being was created to live in fear of existing. Stillness is not weakness. Rest is not failure. You are not required to earn your right to breathe. If this story touched something in your heart, which if it reminded you of a moment when you felt unseen or unheard, take a second today to be still and remember, God sees what systems ignore. He strengthens what others try to control, and He restores what fear tries to steal. Share this message with someone who may need it. Leave a comment if you believe that courage, faith, and quiet strength still matter in this world. Subscribe to the channel to continue stories that speak to justice, healing, and hope. May God protect you, guide your steps, calm your heart, and surround you with people who remind you that you are allowed to exist fully, freely, and without fear. Stay strong, stay faithful, and never forget the power of standing still.